everybody. Welcome back to Gaming the System. Today we are Alex, Jem, and Matt, and we're going to be talking about romance, romantic relationships in gaming to make a change from. We almost always end up talking about sex, and I don't know what that says about us, but we're going to take some time to look at the actual romance, love, wooing between characters. We're going to start off talking about interactive romance, which is romance where you can choose to choose whether or not to romance someone, how to romance them, um, and look at how those kinds of dynamics are portrayed in games, what is realistic about them, what is unrealistic, what is healthy, unhealthy, are they positive, are they negative, or are they somewhere in the grey area in between. I think a positive place to start off with is, do you guys have much experience engaging in these romantic options when you're playing?
I don't think I've played too many games with sort of which have the option to romance other characters. I have played some, definitely, but it's not the type of game that I would choose above all other types of games. So I'm not like an expert on in-game romances, but yeah, I've definitely got some experience. I'm not a complete newbie to it, but I'm not an expert either.
In the same boat actually, because I've not really played a lot of games that I can think of where romance is featured heavily. In preparing for today, I did have been reminded of some along the way. So I think sometimes it sort of just filters into the background of the story, and you don't. Which is probably the right way for it to be, really. But
Yeah.
yeah, so it's certainly not something that I seek out, and but I don't read romance novels either. So, and don't really watch that many rom-coms, so maybe it's just not my thing.
Yeah, I realise looking back at my gaming history that I'm a bit of a. I can't think of a suitable for work word, so I romance a lot
Yeah.
in mainly big RPG games, and the three that stood out the most to me in that they really fit into the story really well. You can either not do them and you don't realize what you're missing, but if you do them, then you know that you're getting more out of the game for it. So you can do it just from the point of view of, especially with some of the massive games. I'll say what they are so that we've got an idea of what they are first. Dragon Age games, and Fallout 4.
Mhm.
So the two biggest ones for me are Dragon Age Inquisition and Fallout 4, because they both have such they're not just afterthoughts, they are entire big stories that you have with each character, and each character is very distinct and they have their own amount of agency and story to themselves. And you can think of it as it's just another interesting long side quest to go on. But I think the biggest impact it's had on me is that it is so profoundly normalized non-heterosexual relationships, because it makes them so simple and accessible that you just go, oh, I like him, so I'm going to romance him, or her. But we'll come on to whether that kind of dynamic is it where everything should go? What are the flaws with it? And I found the perfect words to describe one phenomenon, but I'll come on to that later. I suppose, what your impressions of interactive relationships in games? Do you think, or probably have to come to whether narrative romance or interactive romance is which one is superior in terms of its relationship to feminism and patriarchy? Um, do you think that these interactive romance options are, I can't think of a more nuanced way to say it at the minute, are they positive or negative elements in the gaming industry?
Um, Well, I think like anything like this, it all depends on how it's set up and how it plays out as to whether it's a positive example or a negative example. I think for me, when I'm gaming, what that I'm looking for an escape from reality and sometimes an immersive experience and story experience. So interacting in a romantic way may well be appropriate for the immersive experience and the reality escape. Now, I have a very weird attitude to it because I don't romance the characters in the games, and I don't know why, but I just have a real thing about it. And occasionally I might romance a character just to see what happens, but I'll always like reload it and go to back to before I did because I don't want to impact the story. And I feel I mean, I'm thinking primarily of Mass Effect and Dragon Age, where they have a huge amount of options and things, and in Dragon Age Inquisition, you get the option to like have one night stands or have longer, more meaningful relationships with the other characters, which I think is really cool and fun. Um, However, I just I've just felt really awkward about it because I'm like their boss. If there's felt like there's like this power play that's inappropriate there. So excuse me, but yeah, no, I find it really, my reaction to it is really interesting, and but I do find it a bit. It almost feels like, yeah, like an inappropriate behavior for the character
Yeah.
that I'm playing, my heroic character. The one exception I would say is Stardew Valley, where you can romance characters in that, and because it's like a little village, um, you build up relationships with all the villagers and learn their stories and everything, and it's just kind of fun to I don't know, explore certain relationships, and that changes the way the game pans out. So I think for me, this with Stardew Valley, even though it's this tiny little, like very simplistic game, it almost feels more immersive from the relationship side than like Dragon Age or Mass Effect have.
Yeah, I feel quite similarly. I think in some games, a lot of the interactions, like in I've played before, like in Witcher and in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, for example, just feel really awkward and like I shouldn't be doing it. Um, Although in Witcher it is kind of part and parcel of like Geralt as a character. It just feels like he's very much a romancer of sorts. Um, Although in Odyssey it just felt like the whole notion of in-game romances was more of an afterthought, like they were just throwing it in there for the sake of it because people might like to do it, but it didn't feel like something. I mean, I kind of made it into like my own version of Cassandra, where she was very much into casual, relationships with anybody, anytime, any place. But they did, like, I think the weirdest ones were in Valhalla, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I should say, where you can actually romance your adopted brother's wife, which I felt very bad about doing. I started it, and then there's an option to back out, and be like, no, I'm sorry, this isn't right for me. And then the character just carries on like normal, like you were before, but with slightly less amorous intentions towards you. And I just felt really bad about ending the relationship and then getting with the baker in your home village instead. And then I was like, oh, I need to pay attention to every time I come back from doing like loads of missions around England. I'd be like, how are you, baker? Are you still in love with me? And then we go and do some fishing. And yeah, it would all lead to sex, though, obviously, which was again just really awkwardly handled because obviously they decide to show either everything or nothing. So there's like this weird cutaway where it's like, let's go to the bedroom, and then it cuts to the scene in the morning where they're just putting the armor back on that they already are wearing, you know, that type of thing, where it just feels a little bit weird and awkward. One thing I think I should note is probably the first experience of in-game romancing is probably in The Sims, where it felt quite natural to do because it's kind of
Yeah.
part of your whole goal as a character is to grow and like build your own home and your own life, and part of that might include making a family. So that is one example where it feels a lot more natural,
Mm.
and probably again my first experience of romancing people in games, and I was very into that, definitely, because The Sims is just kind of made for that sort of thing.
Mm.
So it was really quite fun there. But in other games, it definitely feels like an awkward add-on, where it's like maybe we can include this if people want it, but the core of the game is really more about the actual adventure rather than some romance you may or may not choose to have on the side. It's kind of complex. I think it depends on the game that it's in and whether it is the core purpose of the game or if it's just an option for you to get involved.
Yeah, you made me think about, I would be really interested to know like how um whether male players and female players
Mm,
react differently to these options in the game, because to me, I think part of my kind of like standoffishness about it is that it feels a little bit like fan service. It feels a
yeah,
little bit like, oh, let's have a little bit of soft porn in here, just and I think that's a bit awkward. But I think, as Matt said, we always end up talking about the sex on this. So, maybe we need to pull it back, because the
mm,
romancing, which is the lead up to
yeah,
it, is not that. And so if it's done well, and as you say, Alex, if it feels like it's part of the story, and
mm,
it feels consistent within the game world, and your character's story, then it just enhances it, and yeah, it's a positive, but can be awkward.
I think we're gonna, because you two brought it up, we're gonna have to talk about sex very briefly, because you just made me think, Alex, about how you think about the sex is like the binary thing that seems to be like the apex of the relationship
yeah,
arc so often, that you do the romantic foreplay, the quests. Someone referred to it as it's like a kindness coins that you build up to put in a vending machine,
yeah,
um, and so that's what your yeah, an invisible meter that you're building up and up and up with each dialogue option or quest that you do, and then it feels like oh yep, you've had sex now you're
yeah.
in a
And then you can
relationship.
move on. Yeah,
Do you think that is that the, because I've only just realized that's the association that I feel from it. Do you two feel like sex is put in a, where sex is placed in the arc of a relationship and the relationship between romance and sex, because it feels really reductive to me.
Yeah, I would agree. I think in a lot of games, I think they're improving on it slightly nowadays, but in a lot of games that we've talked about, it feels like romance is like the only gateway to sex being the end goal and then nothing more beyond that. Like when I talked about coming back in Assassin's Creed Valhalla and sort of checking in on my baker to see if they're still interested. That, in a way, is kind of good because it's like you can still nurture the relationship after initially starting it if you want to. You can also choose to end it. So in a way, that's good, but it still felt like an awkward add-on to like the whole game. I don't really know how to feel about it because there's the pros in there and there's also just the awkward feeling. But yeah, I guess that's showing some growth in some way that you can just choose to go out on fishing trips or just to spend time together. I mean, probably a lot. I mean, I don't know. After a while, it was a little bit boring. I was like, okay, great. And can I go back do some killing people now? Um, you know, but I guess that just depends on what sort of mood you're in when you're playing it. Um, but yeah, I very often feel like within these setups, sex is just the end goal for a lot of the sort of protagonist
Mm,
characters.
mm. Yeah, I think it's quite problematic from that perspective
Yeah,
and also that it's very simplistic, like, oh, you
yeah,
just have to say a couple
just
of
yeah,
flirtatious things and make a few nice compliments, and then you jump into bed together, and that's it. Then you never talk about it again. I think it's because they either they go all in which case it's like Stardew Valley and you end up married with a family, or The Sims and you end up, with choices to storks bringing babies and all sorts of things, or you sort of do this sort of half-hearted sort of portrayal of a relationship. And I think, it's difficult, isn't it, because I like that in Dragon Age, when that your relationships can impact the world, um, and the choices that you make, and in the same way that the relationships between the characters can have the result of characters leaving your party or refusing to work with certain other characters and things like that, and that tends to pop up across the board actually in a lot of RPGs and role playing games, and um, so I think that's really good. But I think it's quite damaging the way that it tends to be this sort of top level newspaper headline relationships, that it's peddling a false story of how these things play out to a potentially impressionable audience.
I feel like um, in the experience of a young, straight, white man, such as myself, um, is relationships in general are really difficult and nuanced and complex. And as particularly as one grows up, like formative years, I think most people are searching everywhere for clues on how relationships work. Um, Having games like say Dragon Age and Mass Effect and um, Fallout 4, they 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 are good in that they're really good fleshed out examples of romantic relationships. But one thing from the male perspective that we are sort of indoctrinated with um, through so many stuff. This is a more of a healthier way to go about it, but it's the idea that you can have anyone, everyone, every woman is a gettable target, and all you need to do is do the quests, tick the boxes. It only struck me recently how toxic the concept of the friend zone is.
Mhm.
That is going, if I'm doing all the side quests and saying
Yeah.
all the dialogue options, and I'm not getting the can out of the vending machine. It's just taking my money,
Yeah.
rather than thinking that's strange. Do you guys, is that something that you guys have thought about before, or makes
Not
sense?
not in that direct parallel, no, but it does make a sense. It does align, definitely. You know, those two trains of thought. But yeah, there's definitely a parallel there.
I mean, the whole friend zone thing is yeah, incredibly toxic, and this idea that if you invest a certain amount in somebody, then they should you should get something back from them, is that you're entitled, is dramatic and damaging, because that isn't how people work. It isn't a I give this and then you give that, and it's not a clear cut situation in any scenario. And so I think, yeah, it's the given that we have this system, this not system, we have this scenario, this setup in our society and our culture that says, this is how it should be, that there are lots of people out there who complain about the friend zone such that it is a household term, to then be sort of effectively in games is reinforcing this idea that that you give something, and you expect something back in return, and really we should go through life not with that, without, sorry, I'm losing all my words today, but we should do that without that expectation, because actually the reality is that you should give to give, and if you get something back, then great, but you shouldn't ever expect to receive something back. And I think that goes across the board, but certainly in relationships.
Yeah, I find that thinking of the different ways in which patriarchy just drives young people insane in their formative years and beyond, like from the male perspective of being fed all these propaganda messages by the patriarchy, that when if you don't fit, even if you're like me, but you don't you're not that perfect fit for even the patriarchy, but you're being told that you're supposed to, and then looking everywhere that you possibly can, and then you're getting these kinds of messages, and that's how you get stuck into that transactional mindset of thinking. And then that's where I think a lot of, because that's the basis of incel culture, isn't it? It's the idea that we're entitled to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're doing all of the quests, and these NPCs, thinking of women as just NPCs, they're not giving me that.
Yeah, it's almost as if they view us as just, well, in thinking about incel culture, it's like women aren't really real things. Or at least they think of them in a certain way, but of course we know that's completely unrealistic and untrue and unreal. And it's just a complete fantasy that they're living in, which is pretty harmful in a lot of different ways. Um, Sorry, I jumped in. I had to pop out briefly for a second, but so I hope I haven't missed much. But yeah,
And it makes everyone miserable.
yeah,
Incels are miserable,
they are.
Yeah.
and
They are.
they find solace through getting together and venting their frustrations, and then that just builds up, and it's encouraged because that kind of that kind of element in society is a vital part of perpetuating the patriarchy. It's that hatred of women, and then for the female side of things, I can only imagine the impact that the patriarchy has on just any kind of relationship. Because if you the perfect way to perceive you can build good relationships with someone is to be on an equal power level,
Mm.
and the patriarchy makes that impossible. Um, yeah, idea of that's why we need equality, because then everyone can be happier. The
Yeah.
idea that you can't have men are told you can have everything, but we need to accept that there are things you can't have. And I think that we'll go on to the final element, because there's a word I came across today, which I think describes what I've been thinking perfectly, is when games like Mass Effect and Dragon Age and Fallout, apart from apparently Solas in Dragon Age Inquisition, um, you can romance them no matter what your gender or race happens to be. Um, and that's called player sexual.
Hmm.
So these characters are will can be attracted to the player character, whatever it may be. And I want to talk about the what's positive about that and what's negative about that, and what can what should what a positive evolution of this kind of game might be in the future. So, is it what are the good parts about you being able to romance any one of these characters, do you think?
I think it's good in that it shows that if you, as the playable character, want to romance somebody, there's no that gender or identity isn't perceived as a barrier to you, as in terms of getting involved with anyone. There's no barriers there. You can choose whoever you like, and in that way, it's quite um, it's it's giving you choice as a player, which is good, and it's representing a world which is technically a lot more inclusive than this one potentially could be. And that's down to a lot of different things, like a lot of outside factors that influence that. Um, and in the game world, there aren't those factors there. So in that way, it's positive. But equally, if you if you think about that a little bit more, is that really 100% realistic? Is the question of how realistic do you want your game to be? Is it based on an idealized world, or is it based on a particular time period? If it's a game set in like Victorian times, say, would you want it to reflect the attitudes of the time, or would you want it to be completely different to how it would have been at the time? Yeah, I've gone off tangent, I know, but yeah, I don't know what else to kind of expand upon. Really, those are just my initial thoughts.
Okay, what was the question? I've okay.
Positive things about player sexual relationships.
Okay, so I found out earlier, I didn't know this until I was prepping, that in Dragon Age Inquisition, it isn't an all out orgy. If you are a female elf, then you have 6 options to romance. If you're a female human, you have 5. All other combinations have just 4
Hmm.
romantic options. Um, So they have made some decisions in there. Now I'm not sure exactly who can romance who under what circumstances, um, but I think that it that they when they've designed it, they've obviously said, oh, these people wouldn't go with those people and things like that for various reasons, whatever those reasons be. So but I do think that it's a positive that it's positive to see that within these imaginary worlds we are beginning to break down some of the barriers around sort of cultural and social expectations about who you can and can't romance,
Mm.
um, and under what circumstances. And I think that is a positive thing, actually, because I just think that the more we see these things happening around us, the less horrified and shocked everyone will be when they see it again. And but I do think that the games industry is still lagging behind when it comes to, say, if we compare it to movies or TV shows and things like that, where I think it's becoming much more just sort of background. It isn't really a big thing. Like, I mean, I remember watching the first kiss between two women on Brookside, or was it Brookside? Yeah, anyway, years ago, and everyone was horrified and excited and shocked and amused and what have you, but it was a big deal. But it was years, it's been
Mm.
years. But nowadays, you see, same sex relationships, polyamorous relationships, all sorts of interesting open relationships, all sorts of stuff going on that is just part of the story. It's just in the background. It's not specific to, like, it isn't a big deal. So I think that games have a bit of a way to go, really. Generally, I think it's quite a positive thing that they're allowing um, a wide, broader, a broader choice. I would have real problems, I think, if it was if the being very restrictive about who could romance who. I think that would be
Mhm.
extremely damaging. I think where we're at now is not necessarily positive, but it's moving in that direction.
Yeah, it's not the best, but it's
Mhm.
better, and I
Exactly.
think it's going to get better. The I think the positive side is, yeah, just what you're saying. I was thinking of it as in terms of you need to saturate society with these supposedly fringe elements of things. So when you just go, rather than thinking, oh, we'll have three romantic options and we'll make them really rich and have lots of like subtext to them, just go, you can shag anyone, you can shag anyone, you can shag anyone, you could shag anyone, and have that be the core the core level of it. And the problem with patriarchy is the default mode is heterosexual
Mhm.
relationship, um, with the man being the one in control.
Mm.
Um, and the further we can get away from that, and the amount of saturation that we can do it with, is the better, really. On the negative side, it's like when they say, oh, look, you can play as a male or female
Mm.
protagonist.
Yeah.
Aren't we progressive? We get lots of brownie points for how progressive and uh, carving carving the progressive future are. There you go. You're hedging. You're sitting on the fence, which is not courage. You're taking the courage to take this small step forward, but in the grand scheme of things, saying, yeah, you can shag anyone and race and gender don't matter, you're still saying you're sidestepping the conversation about gender and race and
Mm.
power.
Mm.
Um, and but yeah, I agree, Jem, that in on the spectrum of damaging to progress, it's definitely a solid way into the level of progress.
Mm.
Before we go to the end of the session, have you either of you got anything else to add on interactive romance?
No.
No, I'm all good.
Cool. So we'll keep it short. Just go. Thanks for watching or listening. You can see or hear us every Thursday at 7 p.m. So until next time, bye bye.
Bye.